I am Amy Hollander, and my talk is The Climate is Right for Change, Museums and Environmental Sustainability. How many of you became museum professionals because you hoped to change the world and leave it just a little bit better off than how you found it? If you're like me, you wanted to share stories, objects, or ideas that would inspire new generations. The curators I met when I was in school were wise sages with amazing depths of knowledge. They were in charge of preserving and sharing a boundless wealth of material. The museums that I visited were iconic temples of art, history, and science. From the outside, these temples appeared as unchanging monuments that I was sure would stand for centuries. When I entered the museum field, I quickly saw that museums and their professionals were racing to evolve to meet the demands of the swiftly changing world around their hallowed halls. My career as a museum professional can best be described as running an ever-changing obstacle course. Once I learned to navigate around one challenge, I was scrambling over the next one. I learned to digitize collections when computers became household objects in the 1990s. I coded web pages in the 2000s to ensure museums could be found on the internet. During the past decade, I learned to navigate social media platforms expertly. As soon as I learned one platform, though, a new one was rising to prominence. I embraced the concept of interactive exhibits, replacing heavily loaded text panels with buttons, knobs, and dials. Today, I work with sites to bring underserved voices into our museums, both through exhibits and programs, and through outreach efforts to attract broader, more diverse audiences. This will not come as a surprise to anyone in the audience. You've all lived through these changing times and are likely struggling with one, if not all, of these obstacles at your own institutions. You are being bombarded from so many different directions. It may even seem as if you don't have time to breathe. That is why I'm speaking to you at this international symposium. I want to remind you to breathe. I want you to plan first before you react. I want you to think strategically when you consider making changes at your sites. We've been sprinting through an obstacle course, always focusing on the next hurdle in front of us. I suggest that our energies would be better used by approaching our challenges as if we are running a pentathlon. We have to take a step back, take in the whole course, assess our strengths and weaknesses, make the best use of our resources, set an effective pace, and establish benchmarks to celebrate along the way as we strive to reach our end goal. I believe that if we want to change the world, even just a little bit, we have to start by changing how we do business. What I'm going to share with you today is a framework to implement successful change at your institutions. This framework can be used for a multiplicity of issues, but today, I'm going to use the framework to showcase how museums can tackle the challenge of environmental sustainability. No matter the issue, I start by encouraging museum professionals to ask and answer 5 essential questions. Number 1, what is the problem you are trying to confront? Number 2, why is it important to your organization? Number 3, where does your institution currently stand in respect to this problem? Number 4, what resources do you need to help you meet the challenge ahead? And number 5, how will you know that you are successful? By answering these 5 questions, you are engaging in strategic thinking. In doing so, you are opening yourself and your organization up to intentionally shifting your perspectives, transforming your expectations, and creating an organizational-wide culture of change. So let's ask these 5 questions as they relate to climate change and the museum world. What is the problem you're trying to confront? Climate change is one of the biggest hurdles we, as global community, are facing today. Museums have certainly been on the front line, educating the public about climate change through powerful exhibits and dynamic programming. But perhaps it's time for us to be more introspective and look at our own buildings, operations, and policies. As you know, climate change is being caused by the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The great majority of greenhouse gases, 68%, are generated from human activity and come from the burning of fossil fuels. The worst case scenario as greenhouse gases increase is that temperatures will rise so significantly that the ice caps will melt and water levels will rise drastically, transforming coastlines and river valleys. Whole regions of the planet will suffer from wildfires, drought, and famine. That brings us to the carbon footprint. What is the total amount of greenhouse gases you create? A person can have a carbon footprint, but so can buildings like our museums. Now that we know what the problem we are trying to confront is, we have to ask our next strategic question. Why is climate change important to your organization? There are three main reasons museum professionals should care about climate change. Number one, our visitors care deeply about it. 68% of the global population believes that climate change is a major threat. Number two, climate change policy is being enacted around the globe, from the Paris Climate Agreement to New York City's new climate demobilization goals. Policy is being shaped, which will impact how museums will be required to do business in the future. Number three, climate change is a threat to our very existence. If we do not make change, rising waters and temperatures will threaten our communities, our ecosystems, the safety of our structures and of our collections. Coastal cities like Venice are flooding during extreme weather events and will soon be underwater from rising sea levels. Forests are burning as temperatures rise. 26 million acres last year in Australia, 5.7 million in Siberia, and 6.9 million this year in the US. Animals are being endangered by loss of habitat as ice caps melt and wildfires burn. And our artwork collections and museums are under threat of floods and rising water as well. The third strategic question we need to ask is about setting a benchmark for moving forward. Where does your institution currently stand in relation to the problem? Let's do the math. The average commercial building emits 5.4 metric tons of greenhouse gases per 1,000 square feet of building space. The Louvre in Paris, France, is considered the biggest museum in the world at 652,300 square feet. The Warley Museum in West Yorkshire, UK, is the smallest museum in the world at 9 square feet. Your museum is likely somewhere in between. The actual median size of museums globally is 32,292 square feet. So a museum of this size would produce, if we were to do the math, 174.37 metric tons of greenhouse gases annually. To give you a better sense of that number, that is the equivalent to the greenhouse gases produced by 38 cars annually. That doesn't seem like such a large number if there was only one museum to take into account. Now, New York City has about 100 museums. So if we use that median museum size to estimate how much greenhouse gases the city museums produce, it would total 17,437 metric tons annually. That is the equivalent to the greenhouse gases produced by 3,800 cars. Again, that doesn't seem like such a large number. But what if I were to share with you that there are 55,000 museums across the planet? Again, using the median size to estimate the amount of greenhouse gases these museums produce a year, the number is exponentially larger, 9.6 million metric tons. That is the same as the greenhouse gas emissions of 1.7 million passenger vehicles, or of a city like Atlanta, Georgia. What that tells me is that museums could have a huge impact on climate change if we do it strategically. We have to do more than replace our incandescent bulbs with LEDs, or even make the shift to renewable energy. We need to embrace a comprehensive strategy toward environmental change. It needs to be the lens through which we consider all other issues. Just now, I shared with you an average museum stats regarding greenhouse gases. The first step in any strategic plan is to assess where your own institution stands. So it is essential that before you begin drafting your environmental sustainability plan, that you conduct an energy audit. This audit should look at the past year of energy and water bills, square footage, hours of operation, number of staff, number of computers, number of visitors, and the percentage of the building that is heated and cooled. It also means assessing your infrastructure. How old are your HVAC, lighting, and internet systems? Are they operating at full capacity? Are you optimizing maintenance? What level of automation do you have in your facility, if any? A report like this is essential if you are going to gain organizational support for launching a sustainability plan at your museum. And that brings us to our next strategic question that needs to be answered. What resources do you need to help you make this change? To make organization-wide change, you need the whole organization on board. You need to bring both the board of directors and the staff to the table to draft an environmental impact statement and develop the policy to support it. Your statement and policy should address everything, including operations, energy use, water conservation, purchasing, and sustainable product choice, contractor evaluation, recycling, transportation, staff engagement. It should encompass all areas of your museum, including your administrative offices, your collection storage, exhibit space and grounds, as well as your retail operations. If your board and staff are a part of the planning from the start, they will be more likely to embrace the policies when they are put in place. Remember, this is about asking the hard questions. What sacrifices need to be made? What obstacles will be faced? Which efforts should be prioritized? And what support and resources are essential to be successful? Be sure to highlight what is to be gained as well. Discuss the long-term cost savings from such goals as replacing outdated equipment or from generating renewable energy through on-site solar panels. Emphasize as well the benefits your efforts will have for your community, its future generations, and for the planet. Once you have your policy, you need to ensure that there is oversight in place. How will your green team lead the charge? What tools do you need to provide a standardized approach in all departments? How will your efforts be tracked? And finally, and most important, how can you excite and empower your staff to become environmental champions? There are many ways to engage your already overburdened staff in becoming a part of the organization's environmental responsibility efforts. Start by acknowledging that these changes may add to their burden or require them to relearn a system or procedure. Assure them that you will provide them with the necessary training to meet these new expectations. Bring experts in to explain complex changes. Encourage your staff to lead lunch bag lectures, showcasing their own successful efforts. You can also offer incentives, such as subsidies, to encourage your staff to use public transportation, or amenities like car charging stations in the parking lot, which might make it easier for staff to make the choice of buying an electric car over a gas-fueled vehicle. Be sure to reward success and recognize when a department has reached its environmental benchmark or an individual has developed a successful practice. This brings us to our last strategic question, and in many ways the most important. How will you know that you are successful? High-level strategic priorities need to be set for the organization as a whole, but it is crucial to set departmental goals which tie to the broader goals of the organization. Each department should be given the same checklist and the same overall broad climate benchmarks that the organization is striving toward. Then it is up to the department to determine how they can best contribute given their own constraints. For instance, administrative offices can reduce energy use by adjusting the thermostat when the offices are closed. The archives, however, do not have that luxury, as the collection must be kept at a constant temperature. On the other hand, the archives do not always need to have the lights on for visitors. An automated lighting system that is triggered by motion may offer energy savings for this department. You want to make sure that you use SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So instead of a goal saying use less paper, you might say instead, launch digital mailing initiative, which will gradually replace paper mailings over the course of 3 years. Let's face it, environmental change is costly both in time, training, and financial resources. Your plan should include ways to leverage your efforts to garner support from the wider community. With outside support, you can tackle more expensive efforts, like replacing your organization's HVAC system, putting a solar panel array over your parking lot, or installing a living roof atop your building. Hold a press conference to announce the launch of your new eco policy. Consider creating a blog or a podcast to showcase your efforts. Be sure to include your struggles as well as your successes. Build relationships with businesses that might become sponsors for your efforts. Invite other nonprofits to the table. Encourage them to model your efforts and multiply its effects in the community. With a little research, you can capitalize on climate abatement campaigns and the funding sources which accompany them to reach your environmental impact goals. Your eco statement and your policy will go a long way to showing these resources that you are committed to your efforts. Tracking of your efforts will provide the continued proof of your museum's shrinking carbon footprint and give you a leg up in the competition for grant funding. In 20 minutes, I have walked you through the strategic framework for making organizational-wide change at your institution with respect to environmental sustainability. You have defined the problem you are trying to confront. You know why it's important to your organization. You know how to determine where your institution currently stands. You know what resources you need to meet the challenge ahead, and you know how to establish benchmarks for success. Now, if each and every person who hears this presentation goes back to their museum and commits to a plan of environmental sustainability, we could have a huge impact on climate change. We could change the world and leave it just a little bit better off than how we found it. Our impact will be exponential. Our museums will not just have lowered the carbon emissions or reduced their waste. We will have encouraged our staffs to be more conscientious, inspired our constituents to become engaged, and challenged other organizations to follow in our footsteps. This framework can be used to make big changes, but it can also be used to implement small changes. So before you leave, I want each of you to reflect on what you've heard here and pick one sustainable goal that you can tackle using this framework at your museum on your own. As you know, small successes lead to bigger ones. Your effort could be the spark that triggers an organization-wide plan. I thank you for your time and the ISSM for inviting me to speak. I am Amy Hollander from Cloud Mill, LLC, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have now, but feel free to take my information and contact me in future as well.